Welcome to Action 242 as we conclude our look at relationships. We've looked at our relationship with God and our fellow man. We've looked at families and marriage. And now we're looking at a kind of relationship which I think for most people is the most difficult to one to get right, and that's our relationship with authority. Part of the fall of man was a rebellion against God's authority. And there's something within us, within our fleshly, selfish, sinful selves that always kicks against authority. But it's God's desire that we submit to authorities. And it's easy to submit to good authorities sometimes. It's not always easy to submit to authorities that we dislike, that we disagree with, or that we differ from. But this is something that's essential for us if we're going to live an authentic New Testament Christianity and if we're going to glorify God in our lives. We see, for example, that out of the 10 commandments, the only one that comes with a promise is the command to honor your father and mother. We see that Scripture tells us that slaves must obey their masters, which in a modern day context is, at the very least, workers obey your bosses. We're even told to obey our leaders in the church, and that's a difficult one for some because people are afraid of being abused or of being led astray. And of course, there has been abuse of authority in the past. There has been leaders leading others astray. But the answer to that is not to disregard leadership, is not to disregard God's order of things, but to make sure that these things are done in a godly way. The answer to misuse is not disuse, but right use. People often said to me, I'm afraid of being deceived and led astray if I submit myself to man. And that's a valid concern. But Jeremiah tells us that our hearts are deceitful above all else. And so here's the deal. If you're going to follow your heart and follow your own way, I can pretty much guarantee you will be deceived. But if we follow God's way, actually, it's not how much I trust man, it's how much I trust God by trusting man that counts. And then there's an even harder thing to do, which is to submit to and honor those who are in government over us. And around the world, I think like never before, there's been a distrust and a dislike of governmental figures. But let's hear what Paul has to say about this, because this is very important for us. And in Romans 13, from verse 1 to 5, we read the following. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. It's quite a scary thought, but we need to be those, we don't have to agree with everything our governments do, but we do have to honor them, and we have to obey the laws of the land so far as they do not explicitly cause us to sin. Rather than bad-mouthing and denigrating and undermining authority, God has this to tell us. He says, pray for your leaders. Pray for those in authority. Pray that they would have godly wisdom. And above all else, if they're unbelieving leaders, pray that they would come to a knowledge of Jesus Christ. And so if we want to live authentic New Testament Christianity, if we want to see the blessing of God come, if we want to live in godly freedom and godly blessing, we need to be those who recognize that God has instituted authorities, whether it be parents, bosses, church leaders, or governments. And we need to be people who give ourselves in submission to honor those authorities that God has put in place.